Congratulations, Olivia. Your grandfather left you everything. The smile on my sister's face was unforgettable. She turned toward me, leaned back in her chair and said, "This is what you deserve." My parents didn't object. In fact, they looked satisfied. At that moment, I was the only person in the room who wasn't celebrating. For years, I'd been the family disappointment while Olivia was treated like royalty. So watching her claim Grandpa's entire estate felt like one final insult. But then the trust attorney cleared his throat and opened a second folder. What he said next erased every smile in the room and exposed a secret Grandpa had spent years protecting. If you asked my parents, they would tell you they loved both their daughters equally. The problem was, their actions told a different story. Growing up, my younger sister Olivia was always the center of attention. If she earned a B on a test, my parents celebrated. If I earned an A, they expected it. When Olivia made mistakes, excuses appeared. When I made mistakes, lectures followed. For years, I convinced myself I was imagining it. Then I stopped trying. By my late 20s, I had built a successful life on my own. I worked long hours, paid my own bills, and stayed out of family drama whenever possible. Unfortunately, Olivia seemed to thrive on drama. She loved being the favorite. She loved being the person everyone protected. And she especially loved reminding me of my place whenever the family gathered. The only person who never treated me that way was Grandpa. While everyone else focused on Olivia, Grandpa paid attention. He asked about my work. He remembered important dates. He listened. More than once, he told me something I'd never forgotten. Character matters more than approval. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Years later, I would. When Grandpa's health began declining, I visited as often as I could. Olivia rarely came. My parents only visited when it was convenient. Still, Grandpa never complained. He simply enjoyed the time we spent together. 3 weeks after his funeral, our family gathered at a trust attorney's office. Olivia arrived wearing a confident smile I couldn't quite explain. She barely looked at me before taking her seat. Then she leaned back, crossed her arms, and smirked. That's when I knew something was coming. I just had no idea how wrong she was about to be. The attorney's office was quiet when we arrived. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes every cough and every movement feel louder than it should. Olivia, however, seemed completely comfortable. She walked in like she owned the place. My parents followed closely behind her, both wearing expressions that almost looked excited. I took a seat across the conference table and waited. A few minutes later, the attorney entered carrying several folders. After introducing himself, he began reviewing the estate documents. At first, everything seemed routine. He discussed Grandpa's personal belongings, a few charitable donations, and other standard details. Olivia barely paid attention. Instead, she kept glancing toward me with an annoying little smile. Eventually, she stopped pretending. "Well," she said loudly, "I guess some people shouldn't expect rewards after cutting family off." My mother nodded. My father looked away but didn't disagree. I felt every eye in the room shift toward me. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Olivia laughed softly. "You get nothing," she announced. "The properties are mine. The investments are mine. That's what Grandpa wanted." The confidence in her voice was absolute. As if the meeting was already over. As if she had already won. My parents looked pleased. Not surprised. Please. I won't pretend it didn't hurt. But I had learned long ago that arguing with Olivia never changed anything. So I said nothing. The attorney continued reading. Then suddenly he stopped. He opened another folder that hadn't been mentioned before. His expression became more serious. "I should clarify," he said. "There are additional documents that must be addressed before we proceed." Olivia rolled her eyes. My father sighed impatiently. Nobody seemed concerned. But the attorney wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking directly at me. And something told me this meeting was about to change completely. For several seconds, nobody said anything. The attorney opened the folder carefully and adjusted his glasses. Then he looked down at the documents. "Before we continue with the estate distribution," he said, "there is another matter that must be addressed." Olivia leaned back in her chair. "What matter?" she asked. The attorney didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned a page. "Approximately 5 years ago, your grandfather established a series of irrevocable trusts." The room fell silent. My father frowned. "I don't remember hearing anything about trusts." "Most people didn't," the attorney replied. That was intentional. For the first time all morning, Olivia's confidence seemed to waver. The attorney continued. These trusts were created separately from the estate and were funded over several years. Because the assets were transferred during your grandfather's lifetime, they are not included in the property distributions currently being discussed. I watched my mother's expression change. Slowly. Confusion first. Then concern. What assets? She asked. The attorney glanced at the paperwork. Several investment accounts. 2 rental properties. Business interests. And additional financial holdings. Olivia sat forward immediately. Wait, she interrupted. Those aren't part of the inheritance? No. The answer was calm. Simple. Final. For the first time Olivia looked genuinely nervous. The attorney continued explaining. Years earlier, Grandpa had quietly moved certain assets into protected structures managed independently of his will. Everything had been documented. Everything had been legally reviewed. Everything had been finalized long ago. My father rubbed his forehead. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. But it did. At least to Grandpa. Because suddenly I remembered something he'd said during one of our last conversations. Sometimes people show you who they are when they think nobody is watching. At the time I hadn't understood what he meant. Now I was beginning to. The attorney closed one folder and opened another. Then he looked up. There is one more detail. And suddenly, every person in the room was paying attention. The attorney folded his hands and looked directly at me. Then he spoke the words nobody in that room expected. The sole beneficiary of the trusts is Emily. For a moment, complete silence filled the office. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Then Olivia laughed. A short nervous laugh. That's not funny. The attorney didn't smile. It wasn't intended to be. The color drained from Olivia's face. My mother's mouth slowly fell open. My father looked completely stunned. The attorney slid a document across the table. Attached to it was a handwritten letter. Your grandfather asked that this be read aloud if necessary. My heart immediately recognized the handwriting. The attorney began reading. If you're hearing this, then the time has come for my final decision to be understood. The room remained silent. For years I watched how both of my granddaughters handled success, disappointment, responsibility, and family. One demanded approval. The other earned respect. Olivia shifted uncomfortably. The attorney continued. Emily never measured her worth by what she received. She built her life through effort, integrity, and perseverance. My eyes began to sting. The letter continued. Character reveals itself when nobody is keeping score. I remembered Grandpa saying those exact words. Now I understood why. The attorney finished the final paragraph. The trusts are my way of rewarding the values I admired most. This decision was made carefully and cannot be changed. Olivia stood up so quickly her chair nearly tipped over. This isn't fair. The attorney remained calm. The trusts are irrevocable. My father buried his face in his hands. My mother looked close to tears. For years they had assumed Olivia was entitled to everything. Now they were discovering how completely wrong they had been. And there was nothing anyone could do about it. The meeting ended a few minutes later. Nobody left the office celebrating. Not even me. As I walked toward the parking lot, Grandpa's letter was still in my hands. The money mattered, of course. The properties mattered. The investments mattered. But none of those things were the reason my chest felt so heavy. What mattered was knowing that Grandpa had seen me. All those years when I felt invisible. All those family dinners where my opinions were ignored. All those moments when Olivia was praised while I was criticized. He had noticed. And he had remembered. Behind me I heard footsteps. My parents. For a moment nobody spoke. Then my mother quietly said, "We were wrong." It wasn't a dramatic speech. It wasn't some perfect apology. But it was honest. My father nodded. "We should have treated you better." For the first time in years I believed they meant it. Olivia didn't come outside. Part of me felt angry about that. Another part felt sad. Because money hadn't created this problem. Choices had. Years of choices. I looked down at Grandpa's letter one last time. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my purse. Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the trust. It wasn't the properties. It wasn't the financial security. It was the reminder that my value had never depended on anyone's approval. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are the last to recognize your worth. Thankfully, you don't need their permission to know it yourself. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money, property, or investments. It's knowing your worth when others fail to see it. Grandpa's final gift was a lesson in character, dignity, and self-respect. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by the people closest to you?